Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of Plan C, Ocean Interventions to Address Climate Change. I'm your host, Anna Madlener, MRV Manager at the Carbon to Sea Initiative, and I am not joined as always by my co-host Will Burns, who is the Co-Executive Director of the Institute for Responsible Carbon Removal. Instead, I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Danny.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'm Danny Kulowski. I work on communications for Carbon to Sea, and I will say this. No one misses Will more than me. Okay. and
No, that's not true. I miss him more.
Oh, okay. I will give you that. And I imagine that the podcast audience is going to miss him quite a bit as well. And so let me just reassure you, he'll be back next week. Okay.
I like how you were going for Will be back.
Will
and then
be
you
back.
Changed last minute.
I know. I was trying. Will return next episode. But I'm really happy to be here. It's been fantastic. It's been really great. We have a lot of conversations to share. This summit has been really fantastic. And thank you, Anna, for allowing me to join in on these conversations because they've been incredible.
Yeah, and so let's give a bit of context. Why are we here? Danny and I are in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and we're at the Ocean Vision Summit. And for maybe some very avid listeners of the Plan C podcast will know that in the early beginnings of the Plan C podcast, I also hosted a different podcast, which was called The Ocean Embassy. And within that context, I did an episode about the Ocean Vision Summit 2023 in Atlanta. And we are very happy that Ocean Visions invited us back to cover this summit once again. And since Will couldn't be here this summit, Danny is joining me instead. And yeah, we have gathered a number of guests that have been on panels throughout the 3 days of Summit here in Vancouver and asked them to share a bit of insights from their panels, from their presentations, the vibe in the room, the reason they're here. And we hope that this episode gives everyone who couldn't be here, as well as those that were here and maybe, were in parallel sessions. We hope that this episode allows you to gain an insight on the variety of perspectives, the 4 different strategic areas of Ocean Visions and the communities that they align.
And Anna, you mentioned the vibe, and I hope that there's a little bit of that vibe that comes through in this episode as well. Because the one thing that I hear as we talk to people at the summit is just that everybody is really excited that this field is expanding, that there are new people here, that there are new industries represented, new fields of study represented here this week, and overall that there is this encouraging energy and I might even say optimism about where we're heading. And mostly, especially for folks that have been here for several years, a real sense of growth within this field. And you can definitely feel it at the summit this week. And I hope that you'll feel it in this episode as we talk to everyone and get their viewpoints and their ideas and perspectives.
So speaking of talking to everyone, who are we talking to in this episode? We are actually going to divide these conversations into 2 episodes because we had so much material. And so this first one will focus on marine carbon dioxide removal, while the second part will explore other focus areas of Ocean Vision's program. And introducing the summit overall today will be Brad Ack, who is the CEO of Ocean Visions. Following him, we will have a candid discussion with Mark van Keitz from the Grantham Environmental Trust about inflection points in the field and how to think about future funding landscapes. Then we are joined by Mariam Swaleh, who leads one of Ocean Vision's first innovation hubs in Kenya, exploring MCDR solutions. Lily Schacht then shares insights about verification processes at a third-party auditor that has been looking at an ocean alkalinity enhancement project. And lastly, Meg Chatsey from the Washington Sea Grant shares learnings from good community engagement practices for marine CDR. And so, Danny, with that, shall we kick it off?
Let's dive in.
All right, welcome, Brad. Nice to see you. We'd love to start the episode with just a brief introduction to Ocean Visions, your work, and the goals of the summit.
Thanks. So my name is Brad Ack. I'm the CEO of Ocean Visions. Ocean Visions is an organization dedicated to finding solutions to problems at the nexus of the ocean crisis and the climate crisis. And so in that way, we are fairly distinct from almost any other science-based conservation organization. We like to think of ourselves as a science-based conservation organization with an ocean focus, but we take climate as the most pressing threat to the ocean. So everything we do from an ocean lens is about how do we abate and ultimately reverse the climate crisis that is destroying the ocean faster than any other part of the planet. And if we can't do that, none of the other ocean approaches that are commonly worked on in the conservation community, which includes things like fisheries management, marine protected areas, working on plastics, all extremely important, but dwarfed in consequence by the impacts of a changing climate. So Ocean Visions is dedicated to that proposition, and we were fortunate to be founded by a group of scientific and academic institutions that came together, big names that you would know, like Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Scripps, Stanford, Georgia Tech, MIT. A number of representatives from these organizations came together about 7 years ago to start thinking about how they could mobilize the resources inside those institutions towards solutions. In addition to all of the great work that they were doing on observations and fundamental science, there was this gnawing need to do more, to find solutions. And so they came together to create this entity that was going to really draw upon the resources of those institutions. And that's what Ocean Visions is. We have a small staff of about 13 people, but we have the network of 24 partners that include these big institutions in the U.S. We now have 3 partners here in Canada, the Ocean Frontier Institute, Ocean Networks Canada, and Creative Destruction Labs. We have an Italian partner. We have a National Oceanography Center in the UK. So we are growing very deliberately with organizations and institutions that want to be part of the agenda that we are putting forward, this integrated focus at the Ocean Climate Nexus.
Great. And every 2 years you host this wonderful summit. I was happy to be at the summit, I suppose, 2 years ago. It was a very influential point, actually, for me in my career and development in Ocean CDR. And so tell us a little bit more about the goal overall of the summit every 2 years.
So we are trying to advance what is a really new agenda. And part of that is to build a community around it, to engage people, to create a safe space where these topics that are somewhat controversial and not in the mainstream of the ocean and climate conversation can be discussed openly. And so the summit is part of our strategy to really build that community and to create those spaces where difficult conversations can be had, where people can feel safe in exploring topics that some parts of the community might feel are, shouldn't be explored or shouldn't be discussed as much. And so this is the 4th biennial summit, and we're really glad to be here in Canada, supporting our Canadian colleagues and in a country that is very sympathetic to the kinds of issues that we are working on and talking about.
Great.
In your opening comments, you talked really passionately about raising the ambition of this effort. In what ways is this summit raising the ambition? As people leave here, what do you hope to inspire in them?
Well, I kicked off the summit with really a call to action, trying to set the stage that the situation is worse than most of us are willing to spend the time to really understand. And in the oceans, there are a lot of things that are just unseen, but we do know, because of all of our capacity for observation and data collection, that they are dramatically dangerous for ocean ecosystems, for ocean organisms, and for people. And the ocean is calling us to be more ambitious. And so we need to have an agenda that is much more directly focused on the main drivers of change, which are too much heat and too much acidity going into the ocean, both directly the result of too much greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. So if you care about the ocean and you do the math, you have to address the issue of greenhouse gases. And the way we see it, the ocean has 2 big roles that it can play. It can help contribute to the necessary transition to a low carbon economy, because the ocean provides us with low carbon food. It can provide us with much more low carbon and no carbon energy. It can also provide us with low carbon transportation. And so there's a lot of work that needs to happen to really accelerate that transition. But we also have to clean up this massive amount of carbon pollution that we've put into the atmosphere over the last 200 years. And the ocean naturally will do that. If we were to disappear tomorrow, a few million years from now, the ocean would have recycled all of that carbon that we've spewed into the atmosphere back into the deep, but we don't have a couple of million years. So the question is, can we accelerate that? And a big part of our community is focused on that question of marine carbon removal. But we also now recognize that the speed at which we will be able to make a difference with either of those two strategies might not be good enough for the planet and for people. And we might lose really critical parts of our overall Earth system because of how fast change is happening. So we also need to be thinking about preventative medicine, if you will, for some of the most critically endangered ecosystems that sustain all of us. And so we have a big focus on Arctic ice in that arena. Can we extend the life of Arctic ice to keep the Greenland ice sheet, northern permafrost, the overturning circulation in the Atlantic from tipping and creating havoc on the planet? And so this agenda combined is enormous, and it's not getting anywhere near the attention that it needs. Any one of those three elements are not getting anywhere near the attention they need, but they sort of go down in attention from reducing, that's getting some, removing, much, much less, and repairing, which is our third R, almost none. So my call is we have to focus on the most important things. We really need to motivate people to have more ambition about what we do. And that starts with recognizing just how deep of a hole we are in. If you don't know how deep of a hole you're in, you really don't know how big of a ladder you have to build.
For folks who are listening to this podcast and maybe didn't make it to the summit, I'm curious, what is one key lesson that they should know?
Well, that the climate situation and the ocean situation is worse than most people think or understand, but the data is out there everywhere, and it's easy to access, but it's not well sort of publicized by the media. We don't repeat it very often, and that we're going to need a brand new agenda, that the sort of business as usual approach to trying to simply reduce emissions slowly, this net zero by 2050 is it's really a very slow goal when you consider how much damage there already is and how much risk there already is in the system at current levels of CO2, and that we're going to need new inventions and enterprises to clean up carbon because we have to get it out in order to restore a safe and livable climate, and that we're going to have to find ways to protect the critical vital organs of the system while we do all that. So this is a really new agenda. That's the main takeaway. Most of the people coming to this conference know that, but the main takeaway generally is that we have to have a new agenda for the oceans and the climate. The one we have is failing, and that's not adequate.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, Mark. Thank you for joining us so early.
Yeah. Good morning, Anna.
Let's start with a quick introduction. What brings you to the Ocean Vision Summit? Where are you from?
Yeah. I work for the Grantham Foundation and the Grantham Environmental Trust. And we have been long-time supporters of marine carbon dioxide removal activities as part of our broader portfolio of carbon dioxide removal across the whole spectrum. And we have been supporting Ocean Visions for quite a while. We really believe strongly in the works they're doing and are very excited to be here at this convening of which is probably one of the larger MCDR convenings in the world.
You mentioned, Mark, that you're a philanthropic funder in the CDR space. Could you also elaborate on that and talk a little bit about the Orca initiative that you're part of?
Yeah. So the Orca initiative is really a larger effort by 20 plus philanthropic funders that have come together to support the field at the intersection of ocean conservation and ocean climate. It's an initiative that is structured into 7 different pillars, and one of them is focused on marine carbon dioxide removal, which is a pillar that is led by the Grantham Foundation and the Grantham Environmental Trust. This overall initiative has been by now able to accumulate about $350 million for the whole field, and under the specific umbrella of marine carbon dioxide removal, we are at about 70 million, and this is money to be dispersed over a 5-year period. While these numbers are really important, we should keep in mind that at least a portion of them were also intended to have a catalytic function to unlock additional federal resources.
The panel you were on was about the state of marine carbon dioxide removal, and it was a really interesting and insightful perspective around where we are at. And you mentioned in your remarks that we're at an inflection point with regards to marine CDR. Can you share a little bit more about that, what you meant?
Yeah, I think there maybe are at least 2 different inflection points that we're running up to right now. So one thing is that there was actually a tremendous growth in activity, and I think the whole science has moved forward quite a bit. And we see that there is really a relatively large number of people trying to go out into the ocean and test some of the ideas that previously have been only tested in the laboratory and validate if these things are working. So I think that's an exciting thing to see, that we have advanced to the point that we can go out in the ocean. And the other part is, at the same time, in this broader climate field and the political context, particularly in the US, that the whole field had been counting on support from the federal government, and that has gotten a little bit more uncertain. In the National Academy's report, it was clearly outlined that in order to properly investigate the various options of MCDR, that there is a number of at least 1.2 billion. And even though maybe it was 100 or 200 million in overall philanthropic funding, we still have a long way to go, and it doesn't really work without some government funding. And so we have to really think and anticipate how we respond to that.
Given the climate and given the change in resources, I'm curious what advice you would have for groups looking to prioritize for the next couple of years.
I think it's really important to, first of all, look at your own runway. How much can you operate with what you have? And I think it's probably hard to embark on projects that are only possible if you get significant additional funding from federal resources. There is definitely philanthropic money out there, but at the same time, the philanthropic resources are unlikely to match what has been anticipated to come from the federal government.
And in guiding the field overall, you talked about making sure that we're working smarter, that we're keeping the end goal in mind. Like, how do you see that actually playing out?
Yeah, I think it's actually a good opportunity to step back a little bit with regard to what we want to achieve. In the end, what we are looking for is to find solutions to draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in a safe, scalable, and cost-effective manner. And I think what we need to look for in that context is, how do we achieve these goals? Clearly, field trials are an important element, but there may still be opportunities to further refine the underlying technology, and that's something that can really help us maybe at a lower cost point. I feel a little strange about asking people to really pull back, and that's not really the intention, but it's really, let's be smart about that. We want to make sure that we don't lose some good ideas and talent just because we run out of money. So we need to plan strategically so that we can advance these ideas with potentially more limited resources.
Is there also some advantages of this? You talked about taking this as an inspiration for innovation. I'm curious, like, from your experiences, have you seen that in other areas?
Yeah, I've seen that sometimes, that it allows you to take a step back. So there is a trajectory on the one hand to try to scale. And I think we all feel this great sense of urgency of scaling things, hopefully as rapidly as possible. But scaling also means that you lock in this current state of knowledge to some extent. It's like, it depends on how technologically driven your solution is. But if you basically give yourself a little bit more time to improve the underlying technology, you might still make progress in that way and come up with an overall more efficient solution. It might not work all the time because certain things you can only figure out at scale, but it's, I think, something that people should at least consider if it makes sense for their approach.
Shifting gears a little bit to the other inflection point you mentioned, which is the scientific inflection point where we're at a little bit. At the panel, we talked about, a large number of field trials having taken place and being in place since the last 2-3 years. I wonder if you could help us differentiate a little bit about that state of MCDR. When we see that number, 50 field trials, what have we learned from that? Where are we at with MCDR? And how does that help in strategizing and taking that step back?
First of all, I think we need to look carefully at the number of 50. I think if I interpret that number correctly, they have not all happened yet. I think a good number of them are still in planning and are about to get launched. So if they are in planning, if the resources are secure for that, and that makes absolute sense to have them go forward. But it's important that you really have the resources, not just for executing, but also to fully analyze the data. Mm-hmm. And I think what we are starting to see, even last night, for example, Vesta was reporting on the field trial that they did at Duck, North Carolina. And it's really exciting to see these data coming in and really new learnings that, again, you can't really do just in a bottle. Mm-hmm. And so I think I am very excited about it to see them come in, but we just need to make sure that the finances for these trials are secured.
Mm-hmm. Where have you been really excited about moving the needle and advancements in the state of MCDR compared to, let's say, 2-3 years ago? Where are we able to sort of build more strategic bridges and take a focused next step?
I do think that just compared to 2-3 years ago, we have made tremendous strides in the modeling and improving our ability to quantify MCDR and really looking at how to fine-tune that process. It's still, I'm not saying that we are all the way there yet, but even compared to where we were at the last Ocean Visions meeting, I think there have been significant strides. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we understand better what to focus on, maybe, or how to also differentiate between individual steps, language even in some cases.
Yeah, I would agree that other things is that we are still understanding some of the underlying chemistry better. We are starting to see some data coming in on ecotoxicology or just the potential interaction with the biological systems. And I think that's really important information that is coming together.
Anna, you mentioned language, and Mark, you talked about that the one of the challenges that we're facing is the need to convince the public for funding and for support and a mandate to be able to do this. I'm curious, what do you think it's going to take for us to get that public support? What are the biggest challenges in our way?
Well, I think the very first thing is we still need to make sure that people understand that climate change is real and that we have to do something about it. But I think it's really then important in context of CDR is that CDR plays two roles. It's on the one hand, it helps us step on the brake with regard to growing emissions. But the bigger and larger long-term role for CDR is really to bring us back down to safer CO2 concentrations. We are right now, last I checked, was 427 ppm. That was just a few weeks ago, and that's really not considered safe. For the ocean, it means that we have significant ocean acidification, and then for the ocean and the rest of the world, that we have significantly elevated temperatures. And all the effort on just trying to reduce emissions will not return us. It's absolutely critical. It's like when the tub is flowing over, you have to stop the faucet first, but you will not be able to get lower without drawing it down.
From all of the conversations that you've heard here at the summit, as well as you're such a great connection point between so many people who are here, I'm curious, as you leave this summit, What's the biggest change for you? Are you thinking about anything differently, or has your mood shifted from listening to everybody in the room?
Yeah, I think there's good energy. There's, I think, a lot of optimism that we can make a dent with these various approaches. But I think one of the things that I find even more inspiring is that there is a growing number of people from beyond the original starting points. So this is not just North America and Europe anymore. So I think actually Ocean Visions has done a really nice job in building these new centers in Colombia and Kenya and several other places. And seeing people from these centers, specifically their fellows, to engage here is something that we find really inspiring. And I think it's important because the ocean is a global system, and any solutions that we are trying to deploy need to engage and designed and co-develop with people in their respective regions. And I think there's a great start here.
Fantastic. I think that's a wonderful ending point. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark.
Okay.
And safe travels, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
And thanks so much for ending us on that note of optimism.
Yeah,
I look forward to
I agree.
taking that optimism forward and to making progress. Thank you.
Great. Thank
Thank
you.
you. All right. Hi, Mariam. Thank you
Hi.
for joining us. Let's start with a quick introduction, who you are, what brings you here today.
So my name is Mariam Swale. I'm from Kenya. I work at the Technical University of Mombasa, and with Ocean Visions, I work on a project. I'm the project lead of the Fukwe Marine Center, Ocean Climate Innovation Hub in Kenya.
Can you talk about that work that you're doing with Ocean Visions?
So basically, the hub is a center or a platform that brings together different stakeholders. We have stakeholders from policy, community, communication, as well as researchers. And the idea is, how can we bring everybody on board to solve the climate crisis? But our focus is ocean-based climate solutions. What we believe is that everybody has a role to play, whether you're a communicator or an artist or a scientist or a policymaker, because scientists alone can't work or move things or make things happen. So we need everybody on board and build ideas together or solutions together.
Great. And can you tell us a bit more about sort of the state of where things are at, the engagement in Kenya, but also maybe more broadly so far, and what the goal of the African MCDR roadmap is too?
So basically, last month we met in Dar es Salaam to discuss on how, as Africans, can come together in building a collaborative effort in marine carbon dioxide removal. So we had participation from members from different parts of Africa, and I think the greatest support was from Carbon to Sea Initiative and Ocean Visions, but also from the African side, African Union was in support of the event, and IOC UNESCO as well. So the MCDR roadmap, or Marine Carbon Dioxide Removal Roadmap for Africa, the aim is how can Africans come together and build solutions, as well as create an enabling environment for marine carbon dioxide removal when it comes to policy as infrastructure. And also what we were looking at is what scientific infrastructure is available to support research and development for different MCDRs. Because for a long time in many African countries, the governments have really pushed for planting trees, mangrove restoration, and for some countries like Kenya, it has been well established, but for other countries, when it comes to marine carbon dioxide removal, it's still a new term for them. So we are hoping from this roadmap is that we look at nature-based solutions as well as technology-based solutions, so that we can create solutions that are suitable for African countries. So far, during the meeting, we had 5 key areas that we're looking at. The first one is policy. How can policy create an enabling environment for marine carbon dioxide removal in Africa? What do we need from our governments for them to support this? And the other thing we're looking at is research. What do we have in terms of research facilities and infrastructure, and what do we need for us to get there? Is it funding? Is it more capacity building or training or more collaboration with probably the international community? And also the other thing we're looking at is science to business, looking at innovations. How can we create jobs? How can we create entrepreneurs through this marine carbon dioxide removal venture? And then we're looking at funding. It was also a very key area because without funding, we can't do much. So what we were thinking, or what we discussed, is that there is the funding that we can, apply and request, but also how can we generate our own funding through maybe partnerships with the private sector or through the government. And also we're looking at funding as in form of in-kind support. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't really have to be money. It can be in-kind support. For example, how can the government reduce taxes for some of these, maybe raw materials that we might need for development of these solutions?
I'm curious, as you've walked around the summit so far over these past few days, mm-hmm. what are some of the ideas from this that you'll be taking back and informing the roadmap? And I'm also curious, what are some things that you feel like people here at the summit need to understand about the state of affairs in Africa?
I think people need to understand that, number one, climate change is, it's affecting all of us everywhere. And for a long time, Africans have been vulnerable to it, but what we are trying to do is changing the narrative that we are also part of the solution, and we are capable of doing that. And this has been also shown through support from many governments that have developed climate policies or developed ministries that are relevant to climate change. So it is important. And maybe something I can add is the session that we were from right now about the political situation right now, especially what is happening in the US. And one key thing I also raised during the session is that Africa is a potential place for people to grow if people are looking for other places to try to build their careers, because I feel there's a huge gap when it comes to climate change, research and innovation that has not been tapped into, that lies in Africa. So if there are any scientists or researchers that are willing to collaborate and work with us in developing some of these solutions, we are really open to that. And that is what the roadmap is about, mm-hmm. collaboration and developing African research.
I'm curious if you're considering all marine CDR technologies in the roadmap, or if you already mentioned mangrove restoration, if you are already sort of eyeing specific approaches that might have more potential or less?
Yeah. Of course, I mentioned mangrove as an example because That's the only one that is there. But we want to explore all types of CDR, and we have that potential in terms of the resources. And we have scientists who are probably still unaware of that potential. So it will be interesting in the maybe next 5 years, we are able to come up with really great innovations and scientific explorations, right? That is meant for Africa, that was built in Africa. So we are open to, exploring all types of CDR in our roadmap.
You were talking about sort of predicting what scientific research would be done in 5 years. I'm curious if you could elaborate even more, like with your optimistic viewpoint of where things could be. If everything goes according to plan, could you describe the state of research in 5 years from now, ideally across the continent of Africa?
I'm a very optimistic person, but this is my opinion based on the interest that has been created around this roadmap, and also the interest of some of the scientists who are there. There is interest in ocean alkalinity enhancement and also doing computer modeling. The idea is how can we understand what's happening in our waters before we start deploying things? So there is an interest in that. Also, like using artificial intelligence in doing predictions before we do any deployment. But so far, I'm leaning strongly to those two because those are the ones some of the researchers have been discussing. But like I said before, this roadmap is a collaboration effort, and we have people from different sectors, the policymakers and the business, people in business and academia. So we are dependent on all of these people. I can speak for my university, but it's not only Mombasa document, it's for the whole of Africa. So it will be also interesting for me to see what will happen. Yeah.
I think that's a very optimistic and forward-looking point to end on. Thank you, Mariam, for joining us and for giving us this wonderful insight into the work that you're doing. Super important.
And thank you so much for all of that work as well. Yeah. We're really excited for it.
Me too. And thank you.
Hopefully in 2 years, we can hear about updates and progress.
Of course.
And all of the progress towards that optimistic 5-year view.
Exactly.
Let's stay on it.
Definitely. Thank you so much also for having me.
Of course.
It was great. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Lily. For starters, could you go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're presenting this week?
Yeah, I am a senior verifier at 350 Solutions. We are an accredited verification and validation body. We mostly work with Puro and Isometric. We have verified over 370,000 tons of CDR so far, so one of the big ones. We work across all pathways. I focus on mineralization and open system pathways, which is how I ended up at Ocean Visions today. My background, I'm technically a chemical engineer. I've been more on the geochemistry side in the past few years. Before this, I worked at a terrestrial ERW, enhanced rock weathering supplier. Before that, I was a process engineer. So I've seen a lot of different stuff, and getting to work in the verification world has exposed me to a lot of different technologies.
Can you say a bit more about the role of verifiers in the carbon market generally? So you mentioned Puro and Isometric, which are two registries for carbon credits. Let's share a bit more with the audience about the very important function that verifiers play.
Sure. So we're the V in MRV. So the verification. So the role of verification is to make sure that the suppliers are doing what they're saying they're doing, and that the carbon has actually been removed and quantified correctly. And so what we do is take the protocols that are set out by the registry, so Puro or Isometric for MCDR, and compare what the suppliers are doing across all of the different requirements, making sure that they're hitting all of the things that they need to do. And then after verification, they're able to actually list the credits and sell them.
Cool. And since we're at the Ocean Vision Summit, we're obviously focusing a bit on the ocean-based approaches. You mentioned several hundred thousands of tons. I forgot the exact number, 300 something, that you verified, most of that not in the ocean space. So based on what you just said, I'm curious to hear more about your take on the level of specificity that so far is available for ocean-based quantification and verification of that, as opposed to, open areas, sort of room for interpretation, just because we haven't done so much of it yet. So the ones that you did verify so far, what strikes you as sort of learnings and opportunities also for future focus and research?
Yeah. So just as far as stuff that we have already done, we have done validation with Isometric for an MCDR supplier. And then we also have worked with XPRIZE, verifying 7 of the top 20 teams, specifically 3 MCDR teams. So there's DOC and direct ocean capture and OAE, ocean alkalinity enhancement. And then we also have a few projects through the U.S. Department of Energy working on gap analysis for a few other MCDR suppliers. So getting them ready for the verification process, making sure that they have all of the documentation and are collecting all of the data that they'll need.
So, sorry to interrupt. Before we go into that next part of the question, I noticed you differentiated and said you have done validation for Isometric and preparing for verification. Share a little bit more about the difference between the two. We just had this conversation on Monday, and it's actually quite valuable to differentiate. Yeah.
So validation is making sure that you have the plans in place to meet the protocol requirements. Verification is making sure that you actually did them. So Omar at Planetary has once compared it to making sure that validation is making sure that your recipe will actually make a cake, and verification is making the cake and making sure that it is actually a cake.
Nice.
And I
like it.
Think about that a lot.
Cool. Okay. So then the second part was, some of the opportunities and learnings from those first activities in the ocean space.
Yeah. So the suppliers are doing a lot of different things. And so I think the way the protocols have been written is intentionally vague to make room for all of that variation. The downside to that is that it is hard as a verifier to make the judgments where there is some subjectivity. We want to make sure that we're consistent between what we do for each supplier, and also that a 350 verification looks the same as another verifier in the same pathway. And so we don't want to make those judgments as much as we can avoid it. So that requires some going back and forth with the registry to understand what the intent of the requirements are when something's unclear. So I think as we move forward, hopefully we'll get some more clarity on what those requirements need to look like and kind of rein it in some.
I'm just very curious about your gap analysis work. Just as you walk around the summit this week and you chat with other people in the field, are there gaps in knowledge or understanding of verification?
Yes.
What are some of the, what are some of those that you would really like to address?
Yeah. Okay. So I think one thing is that we do look at everything. So verification and validation are very thorough processes. So part of it is a site visit where we go through the process end to end and make sure that all of the sensors are in place, that they've been calibrated and are being used correctly, so that all of the data that we end up looking at during our desk review is reliable and we know that we can trust it. I think we talk a lot about the measurement side of things. There's also a lot of monitoring and then like all of the other stuff like stakeholder engagement that people need to be focusing on. And I think that's something that is often missing when we actually start the validation process, is like making sure that you're recording all of the engagement that you have with the stakeholders, like with the local community, and that you have a grievance policy that is actually accessible to people, so that you should be able to complain about a supplier if you're one of the public community.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about transparency, and this has come up in a lot of conversations, sort of on the side, but also on panels this week. Lots of questions in Q&A chats on the Event Summit app that I've seen about educating, communicating, and explaining what you're doing, especially in ocean alkalinity enhancement. It is complex, and it is, as you say, not only about the quantification. It's a lot about environmental assessments. It's about engaging your community and just sharing and explaining what you're doing. So very interesting to hear that is also part of the verification, and important to hear that is also part of your process. You alluded to early stage projects and requiring a lot of back and forth between the supplier and you, probably more so than in later stages of the process, which gets me to a point that has come up in a lot of conversations we've had outside and within the summit about timelines and efficiencies for verification. Can you share a bit more about approximately what does the process look like right now? How long does it take from dosing to getting a credit in the bank? And where do you see future efficiency improvements or opportunities for improvement?
Yeah. Okay. So you said dosing, so we can talk more specifically about ocean alkalinity enhancement, but this is generally the case across pathways, or across different MCDR pathways. So the first project inception takes a while. So before you're even dosing alkalinity into the water, there's a lot to do to set up the permitting and making sure that everybody is aware of the situation and what's about to happen. If there's tracer tests that are happening, making sure everybody knows why the water is about to turn pink. And then once that is all complete and you start dosing, that's when validation could begin. There are a few different times when it might be convenient for a supplier to start validation. But so that's the making sure the recipe is correct. And so that doesn't need to happen after any dosing has actually happened. I think typically we do them together because it is a big lift on the part of the supplier. There's a lot of documentation that is needed and a lot of time when we're going back and forth with them about different requirements. So that'll take a few months. Yeah, it's hard to say because there haven't been enough to it's definitely a 3-month long process. But something in the range of 3 months. And then you can decide when you want to start verification. And I think this is something that suppliers need to think about, because this is when you need to be verified in order to get money from your carbon credits. But at the same time, it takes a lot of work from the supplier. So you might wait until 50% of the air sea gas exchange is complete. You might wait till 20, or you might wait till 90. So it just depends on what the company's needs are.
Interesting. Okay, that's, I think, very insightful, and actually probably a full topic for another episode to talk about different crediting mechanisms and timelines for that. However, I want to get to one last point about that sort of final output once the verification is complete and a credit is issued. We talked about previously, and we'll probably talk about that at the panel tomorrow, about the documentation and what needs to be seen by whom. Different audiences will likely require different data, different narratives about what happened. So I wonder if you could share, on one hand, what the typical documentation looks like, and whether you think that might have to be adapted somehow in the ocean space.
Yeah. So the output on my end is either a validation or verification report. And that details everything that I have looked at and what I have checked against the requirements. And so hopefully that gives people confidence in what I have looked at and that I have done a thorough job. That is always publicly available. So you can look on the Isometric website. If you go to any of the project pages and scroll down, you'll see the PDD, the project design document that has been created by the supplier. And then you'll see the validation and or verification reports. And you can look through those. And I think you should be able to get a good sense of what has actually happened. I think that something that came out of our talks earlier is that it seems like with MCDR, there's a lot more interest from the academics of like doing their own verification. I'm a little bit defensive about that because I feel like if we are clear enough about what we have checked, then that shouldn't be necessary. But a lot of people don't even know to look at a validation report. So I don't think we're at the point where I can expect that nobody will want to know what I did.
Yeah, I mean, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive either. If an academic has interest in seeing the full spreadsheet and seeing the full data set, that could also help in instilling a lot of trust, especially if they get to the same result as you did, which hopefully they would. I'm thinking also about different outputs for sort of the local community, for example, who may be sort of satisfied and content to know that theoretically there is a spreadsheet of data to look at, should they wish to do so. But more importantly, what is the story? What is the data that they need to see about their local, impacts or what happened during the verification that is potentially very different from seeing the full set of data that led to X number of tons of removal?
Yeah, sure. So I think that depends on the local community, and hopefully that is something that the supplier would get a sense for through their community engagement, better understanding what the concerns of the local community are so that they can provide that information to them. I do think that you're probably right in that the stuff that they would want to see is different. So they might want to focus more on the monitoring data and making sure that there are no extreme impacts to the pH of the water. And so that data is also something that we will review as part of the verification and should also be public. I think that we haven't quite got in there with the DMRV systems. I think there's still been
The
more
digital
focus.
RV system, yeah.
Yeah. There's still been more focus on the CDR quantification than showing all of the monitoring data.
Right.
I'm curious, as you've gone through the conference this week, are there any times that you've wanted to jump up in the middle and say, no, validation works here?
Yeah, I mean, anytime anybody says what is the academic response going to be, I just feel like we should be trusted. And we are putting in a lot of work to make sure that we are going the right direction with CDR, that everything that is verified is reliable and can be trusted, that a ton is a ton.
Great. Good positive note to end on, I think. I think it's safe to say there's still a lot of work to do, but definitely, I think I've made the point in the podcast before, the V part of MRV is very often underestimated. We have so far focused a lot on the MPs, like how to measure, how to model, what to monitor. And the full sort of suite of things that goes into MRV as a process is quite extensive and goes beyond just that. So thank you for sharing a bit with us what that world looks like. And hopefully people are encouraged to look at the validation reports and verification reports.
Yes, so we try to post them on our LinkedIn whenever a report is published. So that would be a good place to look.
Great.
Thank you so much, Lily.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Meg. Good morning.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're very excited to hear from you. To start off, could you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit what brings you to the summit today?
Yeah. So my name's Meg Chadsey, and I am Washington Sea Grant's carbon specialist, which actually means that all my work focuses on the problems that are caused by all the extra carbon that humans have been putting into the oceans and the atmosphere for quite a long time, and really not just the problems, but how we're going to deal with those impacts. And that includes pulling that carbon back and putting it in safe, stable forms so that we can kind of reverse at least some of the climate change and ocean acidification that we're seeing right now.
Wonderful. And we've heard a lot about the necessity for that. One thing that came up a lot in the summit generally, and in particular on the panel that you were on, is working with communities. And I wonder if you could share with the audience a bit what your panel discussed and talked about, and give a little bit of an insight.
Sure. So this is in the context of MCDR, which is probably an acronym someone's already explained, but marine carbon dioxide removal. So there is, as I said, too much carbon as a result of human activities in the ocean, and it's messing things up. So one way to deal with that is try to get it back out. And there are a variety of proposed approaches that are being sort of researched and developed in the pipeline right now, ranging from nature-based solutions that rely on, say, growing kelp to very techno-sounding solutions that zap seawater with electricity and make the carbon come back out and then put carbon-depleted water back into the ocean. All of these things have to happen in a place. Right now, a lot of them are still even in the benchtop, we say, stage, which means they're being worked on and developed in laboratories, but you can't really know if something's going to work or scale up to a meaningful approach that can actually accomplish some good unless you take it out and you try it in the field. And in this case, for marine carbon dioxide removal, the field generally means coastlines. It's always easier to work on land than it is to work in the water, even when you're working with water. And so coastlines have people on them, especially here in North America, where a lot of the work that we're talking about right now is happening. And so those people, those are communities. Some of them have been there for thousands of years or since time immemorial, as you often hear First Nations and tribes talk about their relationship to these places. Some people, like me, arrived in Puget Sound when they were 2, but still feel a very deep connection to the places where they live and care a lot about the ocean and the broader environment. Often a company that wants to pilot a technique is not coming from the region. They might be doing their pilot experiment or hoping to do their work in your backyard because of, the oceanography is perfect for it there, or the capacity, the facility is there, or the scientific know-how is there that really facilitates this kind of work. So they're coming in from outside, and they're coming in, frankly, with ideas and words and messages that a lot of people have never heard before. People know about climate change. They have various feelings about it. And you can talk to people you've never met before about climate change and climate change impacts. But if you walk in and say, "Hi, I'm a startup working with marine carbon dioxide removal," you tend to get blank stares. So there's this double challenge with doing work in communities, that you first have to help people understand what it is you're talking about, and then ask them, often in the moment or in short time frames, to tell you back what they think about that. And that's really challenging. It's also really important, and there are some examples of it being done really effectively right now in the Pacific Northwest. That not because we're the best at it. That's where I live and work, so I'm most familiar with what's going on here. So anyway, our panel was really focused. The title was something like Working with Communities around MCDR, and that's because gaining community trust and social support, especially in environmentally and culturally rich areas like coastal Washington State, is essential to responsibly scaling MCDR research and pilot projects. And we're still at the very early stage, but it's essential even at this very early stage. And as I said, in many parts of the world, and definitely in the Pacific Northwest, where I and many of my colleagues live and work, this emerging MCDR sort of effort is an opportunity to really meaningfully engage with Indigenous communities and integrate and honor their leadership and guidance and priorities in the process of talking about these projects, why they're important, do we want them to happen, what should they look like, how can people feel more included in this longer conversation about developing this technology. And all the panelists in my panel, they've all been actively engaged in pilot projects and collaborations, and they all shared really personal insights about the critical importance of really building real building and sustaining real relationships with communities throughout this work. So we just kind of hoped to share some of that wisdom with the broader audience here at Ocean Visions.
I'm curious if you could draw on either some of the examples from the panel or that you've have seen across the field of good community engagement. Like, what does successful, meaningful community engagement look like?
Yeah, I do really want to draw on an example from the panel yesterday. So Kyla Westfall, who is with Ebb Carbon, which is doing pilot projects in the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State. Specifically, their newest one is in Port Angeles Harbor. Kyla and Ebb Carbon have set a terrific example for the rest of us for how to sincerely have these conversations with the residents, especially the tribes in the region, the coastal region where they're working. And what this looked like, someone asked Kyla this question from the audience yesterday in the panel, and they said, what did you actually do? You know, people talk about engagement, but what did it look like for Ebb? And she talked about how their company, which is based in California, when they started years ago, exploring the idea of working here on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington, they connected with the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, which is a good place to start in Washington if you want to have a better understanding of what tribes are in the area, what their rights and concerns and sovereign uses of the water space are. So she started there. And then began to build out a network and talk to more and more people. And one of the great examples that she talked about yesterday was working with a tribal elder from the tribe closest to Port Angeles who had brought concerns about the impact that the pilot project might have on salmon. And they listened to her. They invited her to the project site. They had basically said, whatever you want to know, we're here to help you understand. Please share your concerns. And what Kyla said that was really critical, she said that was actually a make or break moment for Ebb Carbon. If through this visit, the site visit and subsequent conversations with this woman and the community that she is from, they had said, you know what, now we know more and we're still not comfortable, that would have been make or break, and Ebb would not have proceeded. That's a big, scary thing for a startup to do, all the work that's gone into getting to that point, and that still being willing to honor that commitment to communities and say, it doesn't happen without you, is incredible. And probably the fact that has been their approach is why they've had the success that they have had so far. So they are permitted, they are going ahead, they do have approval from the tribal community to do the work that they're doing. They've even been partnering with that community on some experiments to see what effect changing the water chemistry temporarily has on salmon. And fortunately, no effect was noted in the early experiments. So everybody's like, phew. But they're still doing those experiments. They're not just going to do it once and say, okay, we know what we need to know. They're going to keep following up, and there probably will be more experiments in the future. So honoring that commitment really showed up there.
So for people in the room at your panel, but also for this podcast audience who didn't attend, like, what do you think are the key messages, the key ideas to take away from this in advancing the conversation and the understanding around community engagement? Yeah.
Many people have heard, especially in this context, go slow to go fast. All of us in sort of the MCDR world live with these conflicting truths. We all feel the urgency of the problem and how little time there is to do things about it. And then we also know that you cannot rush these things. And so you will often hear people say, go slow to go fast. And then you have to figure out, well, what does that actually look like? And there are various ways of interpreting that. But Brad Warren, another panelist, he tweaked that a little bit. And he said, and this is something that Ebb has really proven, is is a successful pathway is go slow to go far. First of all, it implies that this is not a short game. This is a long game. You will be going far, and you need to go slow in building the relationships and trust in order to ensure that you will be able to keep having those relationships. But kind of counterintuitively, and this is actually what I think we want to see, this speaks to the urgency, is Ebb is going slow to go far and making fast progress as a result. And that is, I think, the hard part for a lot of people who know how important it is to work sincerely and with integrity with communities and know that that's going to take time. They feel like, I can't afford to spend the time. But when you see examples where when you do take a couple years to, you do take that much time, and then it starts to pay off in your ability to continue to move forward in the subsequent years, I think then you can see, okay, we can do this,
I think it's a great point.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
this has been a
thank you.
really great conversation.
Super fun.
Fantastic.
And yeah, let's move
Okay.
forward on community engagement.
All right.
Thank you. All right. We are going to take a little break here and share the second half of this episode about the summit next week with all of you, and hope you reflect on these first couple of interviews and look forward to the second half.
And if you enjoyed this episode, do subscribe, because I can promise you that if you enjoyed the ideas that were shared today, there's much more of this to come. So please be sure to listen to the next episode as well. I think you'll enjoy it.